Good morning, Oakwood. Today we're looking at Psalm 131, which is all about humility. And talking about humility, let me tell you the story of a rather pompous bishop who was visiting a town and had to stay at the local inn. He had an early start the next morning, so he asked for an early morning call. The landlord dutifully rose early, and he also roused his young son and asked him to get the bishop up while he made the bishop's breakfast. Now, this lad was a good-hearted lad, but he had a tendency to get everything wrong. So his father carefully coached him to knock respectfully on the door and say clearly, "It's the lad, my lord. It's time to get up." His father went through this several times, and only when he was certain that the son had grasped it did he send him upstairs to announce that it was morning to the bishop. So the lad bounded upstairs full of his important task, but unfortunately he got it wrong again, and instead of knocking respectfully on the door and saying, "It's the lad, my lord, it's time to get up," he hammered on the door and announced in booming tones, "It's the Lord, my lad, your time is up." Well, the bishop got a reminder that morning that any importance he had in this world vanished once in the presence of God. But that's how it should be for all of us, every day of our lives. Christians of all people should be humble people because we should live in an awareness of the presence of God. Psalm 131 describes a very healthy mindset for the person who wants to walk with God. It calls for that person to not concern themselves with big issues, but to simply be close to God, as a really young child is with its mother. That rings a bell, doesn't it? Because in Matthew 18, we read that at that time the disciples came to Jesus and asked him, "Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" He called a little child and had him stand among them, and he said, "I tell you the truth. Unless you change and become like little children, you'll never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever humbles himself like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven." Humility is a state of heart and mind that God really values. James 4 verse 6 says, "God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble." Well, I want to receive God's grace, and I really want to be close to him. And somehow humility and closeness to God always seem to go hand in hand. Perhaps your experience is different, but I've never yet met a proud Christian who seemed close to Jesus. Yet every truly humble Christian I've met has been full of Jesus and simply overflowing with love and joy. Humility brings us closer to God and to others. But the opposite of humility, pride, pushes us away from God and away from others. Pride always means enmity. It is enmity. By its nature, pride is competitive. The proud person is always comparing, always looking to have more or to be more than everyone else. So the proud person can never truly be comfortable with God, because he or she is encountering one who's infinitely better than them in every way. It's telling that pride was the devil's original sin. He was jealous of God and refused to stay in a right relationship with him. He fell through pride. Pride inevitably separates us from God. It's spiritual cancer. It kills our spiritual life. So how can we turn away from pride and achieve this heart of humility that God values and that's so good for us? Can I make 3 suggestions? 1, ask God to develop this attitude in you. James 3:13 talks about the humility that comes from wisdom. And in James 1 verse 5, we're told, "If any of you lacks wisdom, he should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault." So let's ask God for the wisdom of humility. 2, live it. Live it out. Do what Jesus said. Take the lowest seat. Consider others better than yourself. And leaders lead in humility. All of us should have a servant's heart to one another. So, if you want to grow in humility, if you want the attitude that Jesus had, if you want to be more like Jesus, then simply live each moment as Jesus told you to live. Be humble in your deeds, and before you know it, you'll be humble in your heart. Philippians 2 verse 5 says, your attitude should be the same as that of Christ Jesus, who, being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, but made himself nothing, taking the very nature of a servant. Jesus repeatedly took the role of a servant. He washed his disciples' feet. Well, Galatians 6 verses 2 and 3 tells us to share one another's burdens, and in this way obey the law of Christ. If you think you're too important to help someone, you're only fooling yourself. You're not that important. And 3, love. Love God with all your heart. I think this is by far the most important of the 3 things you can do. If your heart is full of love for God, then you won't have room to love yourself. I think that's one of the meanings of the verse, for you are dead, and your life is hid with Christ in God. Colossians 3 verse 3. My brother-in-law is an undertaker, and he can tell you that dead men and women don't care what you say to them. They don't care what you do to them. They're beyond that. And we too, if we're serious about growing in God, serious about becoming more like Jesus, we must become dead to ourselves, dead to this world, dead to our reputation, dead to our pride. And we do that by being so in love with Jesus that we just forget about all those things. They seem like nothing to us. There's one last thing I think we should remember. God promises to exalt those who humble themselves and to humble those who exalt themselves. Matthew 23 verse 12. For whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted. It's another of those great reversals that God delights in. The first shall be last, and the last first. And I think that those who walk most in humility in this life will find themselves, to their surprise, exalted in the next. Thanks, friends. Bye-bye.